Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. This is Michael Lev, senior writer and columnist for the Arizona Daily Star. I am joined today by our very own winter soldier, Bruce Pascoe. He has braved the Appalachians, the mountainous regions, the Midwest. He has survived the winter storm. He's back in Tucson, covered a 2-0 Arizona Wildcats road trip to Cincinnati and West Virginia, the first road trip in the Big 12 for the Wildcats, and it was very, very successful. Bruce also had personal success in that I think he caught all of his flights, made all of his games, and so forth.
Crash.
Bruce, you're back. Didn't crash on the roads. Tell us about the winter. Tell us about your road adventures, Bruce.
Well, you're the one from the Midwest, but I'm from California, so all this stuff is interesting to me. And I had never been to that. I've been to Cincinnati and I've been to Pittsburgh, but never a lot of that part of West Virginia in the country. So, and it was the cheapest way to do it was to fly to Pittsburgh and just get a car and drive the whole thing because getting one-way car rentals is expensive. Flying into Cincinnati was expensive. Flying to Morgantown, I knew would be iffy because they, small airports, small planes, they often get canceled in the winter, and that's exactly what happened. So it's kind of like flying into Pullman or Eugene. I never did that. So so it just drove everywhere, and it was a long drive at first getting to Cincinnati, but after that, it wasn't too bad. I went through after the Cincinnati game, got out that night, tried some Skyline chili that night, and then got to Charleston, West Virginia. And then the next day drove through kind of a scenic route through West Virginia just before the storm hit, and then probably stayed too long because the storm did hit. And then I was driving through snow for about 3.5 hours on Sunday night before I got to Morgantown. But fortunately rented a all-wheel drive. I had one of those like where you could choose your own car, and there was an all-wheel drive there, so got that, and it really helped. I mean, just driving that thing. Pretty stable, and so it was pretty cool. I mean, I saw a lot of little towns I've never seen, probably never will again, or just a different part of the country, and kind of cool to see it, and to see it in the middle of the winter with fresh snow and everything was pretty neat too.
All-wheel drive is clutch, to
Yeah,
be sure. I think you were smart to avoid a bunch of flights. Like you could have done multiple flights on this trip, and when
yeah,
those winter storms hit, a lot of those flights end up getting canceled, right? So you're kind of in
yeah,
control
yeah.
of your own destiny.
Yeah, you just have to take a long time, and every now and then a road could get closed, but that didn't happen at all. In fact, I will say the thing that impressed me about West Virginia is like there was you'd pass a plow like every 15 minutes. There, no matter what road, even some of the smaller country roads, the little state highways or whatever. And I'm like, where do these guys come from? I guess they, there are a lot of them are part time or whatever, and strap a plow on their truck or whatever. But it was impressive the way they were ready to go.
Skyline chili is very polarizing. I've never had it personally. What did you think of it?
It's funny. I tried it like probably 20 years ago. I was there for a wedding and tried it, and I remember it was not good. And then when I tried it this time, it was a lot better than I remembered, actually. It's weird looking, and it's you get it on spaghetti and hot dogs and stuff, and it's just kind of seems weird, but it's not. You have to not think of it as chili. I think that's the problem, like because it's more of like a European Mediterranean type of sauce with a lot of flavors. Like cinnamon really came out when I tried it this time. So if you just have that expectation, at least I thought it was better. But I mean, one thing you can say is it hasn't expanded a lot out of that tri-state area, as they call it down there. And so I think it really is something that people grow up with it and they love it, and people who aren't from there generally don't. And that's the way it is. But I will say I got an email from somebody who was so excited that I wrote about it, and she was from Cincinnati though, and she said I think she had left in the 70s or something and craves it every day or whatever. And that's the way people are. I think. And Brian Brigger, the equipment manager at U of A, is he was talking it up, and then I think he had been there. I think within the first 24 hours, he had already been there twice over the weekend. So he just it's one of those things that, you grow up with it, and I think that's like a lot of unique foods around the world. You grow up with it and get used to it, and you grow to love it.
Yeah, it's one of the cool parts about our jobs is we get to go to different parts of the country and try different cuisines, test out the local fare. I'm sure you'll have some good barbecue at some point in time here across the Big 12 slate. Very rare for a team to go 2-0 on the road on one of these swings. If you look at the overall road record in Big 12 play across the league last year, 42-84 was the record. That's a winning percentage of 333. Only one team finished the season with an above 500 record in conference play. That was Houston, which won the league, had the best record in the league, 15-3. They were also 9-0 at home. Currently, it's a much smaller sample size, but 9-15 is the road record. So that means teams other than Arizona are 7-15 on the road. What impressed you the most about the way the Wildcats were able to pull this off?
It was the composure, really, and because we had seen, watching them, a number of times in the Bahamas, most notably against UCLA. Big leads, they just kicked them away and didn't respond. This time they kicked away a 19-point lead against Cincinnati. The crowd's getting into it. It was actually a pretty quiet crowd for most of that game. And then all of a sudden, after they got it, Cincinnati cut it to like 7 or 8, then the fans started going nuts. And it was like, so all of a sudden, and that could have been, based on where Arizona was a month ago, that would have been the moment when they just fold. But instead, they had a little response there. Granted, you could always argue that, and this is often true, how it is probably true in a lot of sports where you're down a lot, you get back, you tie it up, and then you just kind of exhale, and then you fold. And I think maybe there was a little bit with that with Cincinnati where they just ran out of gas kind of thing, but Arizona had a response and in a semi-hostile environment. And then, at West Virginia 3 days later, the thing there was just a killer instinct that they came out. And granted, West Virginia wasn't playing at their best. They had been just ranked and just coming off a big win at Kansas and another home win and Oklahoma against Oklahoma State. And that's kind of a dangerous situation there where they were maybe feeling a little too good about themselves, didn't come out as well as they thought. But I thought Arizona really, they really stepped on them. They did not give up, and then they just kept expanding that lead, and didn't let them come back. And we'd seen that a lot. So two really impressive performances like that, and that's kind of a little more of the team that we expected to see coming into the year. That they really are sort of a different team, and than they were. Granted, the schedule is going to get a little bit more tougher down the road here, but it's a good sign for them to start conference this way for sure.
Yeah, West Virginia got within 5. A lead that had been, I think, as large as 15. And again, Arizona kept its composure. I think the common thread between the finish of the Cincinnati game and just kind of the way the second half played out against West Virginia, to me, was Jaden Bradley. He's just so steady, so solid, doesn't do anything super flashy out there. He's got kind of an old school game. Like there's a lot of like shots off the glass and scoops. And finger rolls and stuff that everyone's just into 3-point shots and dunking. And he did make a couple 3-pointers against West Virginia, but I was really impressed with how Jaden just kind of kept everything under control in both of those games. And I think he's a very underrated and important player for this team.
Yeah, I think, that's exactly right. And I think he's had to adjust. Last year he was kind of that steady guy, but he was off the bench and he was very efficient. Didn't take shots. He didn't need, didn't do anything that, didn't really force errors. It was, but he was playing less minutes, or was less on his shoulders. And I think coming into this year, he had to adjust to a lot more of that. In big games, he's basically playing 38 minutes a game in pretty much every big game they've had. And that's a lot, but, he showed on this trip that he can handle it. And I think, he didn't, it's funny because Tommy Lloyd actually said something when I asked him. I said, well, is that sustainable? You can keep playing him like that. And he said, well, it helps that the timeouts are a little longer in some of these Big 12 games. I think it depends on which ESPN or whatever's covering. Sometimes they can go up to like 3 minutes. He said, that makes a difference. And I asked Bradley about it the next day, and he said, I didn't even hear about that. I guess it helps. He doesn't even, he's not even thinking about, the fatigue or whatever. I mean, certainly his efficiency's down on a per minute basis or whatever, but you're right. I mean, the way the main thing with him is the way he's running the show here. And again, with a lot of different guys who, can do things, he's only scoring when he needs to. And sometimes there's, because of the other threats and Caleb Love and some of the things going on Henry Vasar lately, he'll get some open shots, and he's really efficient at hitting those when they pop up.
He's averaging 37.7 minutes
Yeah.
per game in the 3 conference games,
Right.
which is a lot. Obviously, he's not coming up the court very much at all. Overall, he's at 31.1 minutes per game, which is also a team high. Doesn't waste a lot of energy out there. I feel like he is someone who could play heavy minutes. I think 37.7 is probably a little too much. You probably want to get that down into the lower 30s if you can. But I think you pointed this out somewhere. They don't have games like within a 72-hour span really anymore, right? The games are a little bit more spread out over the course of the week. You'd have those Thursday, Saturday combos in the past, right? Where it'd be a quicker turnaround. So there's a little bit more time to rest in between too, which might help him.
Yeah, they have 2 Saturday Mondays, but the rest of them, every other conference game is going to have at least 2 days in between. So that does make a difference. And especially if you get later in the season, I think these coaches sometimes do things where the starters or a guy like Bradley, like literally will sit out most of the practice, and just kind of watch or whatever, because they, and so he can get a lot of rest in there for sure. It's definitely a different deal. However, the travel is a little more grinding, even with the charter flights, because they do have some, they'll have one more 2-game trip here coming up next week, but otherwise they're in and out, and that, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Basically every week or 10 days they're going to be flying somewhere and coming back at 2 a.m. or something like that. That's easier when you're 20, 21 years old, but it's not easy for anybody, I don't think.
And I noticed that you mentioned Uno is a big game that the team likes to play. The women's team also is very big into Uno. So it seems like that's a very popular way to pass the time for the young people on these teams when they're stuck at hotels or they're on the road for a long time.
Yeah, and apparently, they usually play on their phones, and but apparently Bradley, of all people, brought I think he brought an actual old school
cards, paper? What?
Yeah, I know. And
crazy.
So they actually were, in that hotel in Morgantown where they were literally there for almost 3 days, sitting around, couldn't go outside much, and really got into it. It was kind of reminiscent last year when they played at Washington State, and they got delayed an extra day because there was some problem with the charter, and it was like 5 degrees outside, and they had to stay in that hotel, and they played a Russian card game that I think some of the European guys had turned them on to or whatever, and and they kind of bonded over that. And I think after that they they actually pulled off. That was actually, after that, it was one of their best stretches of the season. I think they won like 7 of 9 or something after that. Not if that had anything to do with it, but just sometimes those little, we talk about practicing and they're spending extra time in the gym or in the film room or whatever, but sometimes just that team bonding, stuff like that has nothing to do with basketball, can actually make a difference. And I think maybe it's playing a little role here.
Yeah, that Washington State trip, Dave Hickey, former athletic director, was criticized by a lot of people for going on that trip at a time when Arizona was trying to keep Jed Fish, and he ended up spending a lot of time kind of stuck in a hotel room up there. But he was busy. He was doing work.
You can work the phones in a hotel room. Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't matter, I don't think.
We've learned since the pandemic that you can kind of do your work just about anywhere, and the types of jobs that we have anyway. So Jaden Bradley has great chemistry with KJ Lewis. It's pretty clear those two guys were on the podium after the game, but you could see how they were able to work together during the game. I thought that was the best game that KJ Lewis has played as an Arizona Wildcat when you consider the circumstances, the opponent, the fact that Caleb Love was off again, and we'll get to that in a minute. On Sports Reference, they list the Hollinger game scores for every game that every player plays, and that was his highest ever at 20.9. His previous high was 17.8 against Southern Utah. He did the hustle plays, the defense, all of that stuff that he usually does, but he was able to create his own shot in that game. I mean, there were crossovers, pull-ups, fadeaways. He hit a three-pointer. I mean, if that's the KJ Lewis that we're going to get the rest of the season, I mean, that's a difference maker to me, and also a potential NBA player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pull-ups really were something. And then I think there was also one, you talk about chemistry with Bradley. I think he has a really good chemistry with Carter Bryant. They're pretty good friends. And there was one case where Bradley passed to Lewis on the left wing. Lewis took a couple dribbles, went just inside the arc, could have easily pulled up, had a guy somewhere nearby him, but instead fired a bullet to Bryant, who just kind of popped right, cut right under the right side of the basket, and easy layup. He beat his guy, and that speaks to not only skills and practice and knowing where Bryant's going to be at, but a little bit of unselfishness too. And so he's got a lot of that. And I think with him, it's been a weird adjustment. I mean, he came in. He was in this role last year, and this is kind of what we projected he'd be like, that kind of game. But then he came in, was starting, had expectations that he was going to start, have this great year, and go to the NBA. And I think he was maybe forcing it a little bit and stressing a little bit, and then and then he had those two incidents where he had two technical fouls in 3 games. Lloyd took him out of the starting lineup the last game in Bahamas, and then after that, it sounded like Lewis voluntarily decided to step down from the lineup and thought maybe this would energize him. And it still took a while, but now we're seeing finally he's more of the player that he was expected to be. And you're right, absolutely. If he plays like that, he can make a role for himself in the NBA. There's no question.
Yeah, he is known for his hustle and his defense and
Yeah.
the energy that he brings, which makes him a good guy to bring off the bench. If he can add the scoring element on a consistent basis, that really changes the equation, I think, for this team and for his personal future. Caleb Love remains an enigma, to be sure. I know KJ said after the game to you that he loves away games and that they love away games. If you look at Caleb, he does not. He is 8 for 38 from the field in their 3 true away games, averaging 9 points a game.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, he's a 46.3% shooter. At 18
Yeah.
points per game, people would probably point to the strength of the opponents that Arizona has played in general in those in those two respective subsets as maybe being a big difference. But you can be an enigma, but not necessarily a liability. And I thought in this last game that he didn't force it too much. And Tommy also, interestingly, decided to run with a lineup without him for most of the second half. It was kind of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it situation. What did you make of Tommy's decision, and then just how Caleb's just continues to kind of be up and down?
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I think that is it. Lloyd said afterwards. I asked him about that a little bit, and he said he was just going with the hot hands. And the interesting thing about this team in general, the best players right now are all coming off the bench pretty much. And KJ Lewis, and the way Carter Bryant's been playing lately, and certainly Henry Vasar. And you can make an argument for all three of those guys should be in the lineup. And so
Mm-hmm.
in that lineup, and a lot of those times he had Lewis and Bradley and Bryant in there together. And so I think he was just rolling with it. And I think it's interesting because I will say that throughout this year, Lloyd has been pretty staunch on, like, I'm sticking with Caleb Love. He's my guy. He's going to work it out. And this was the first time when he really sat him for an extended period of time, other than Wisconsin when he was in foul trouble. And that kind of threw his game off. In fact, that also threw those road numbers off, where because that game was just kind of that was just like that was a game a forgettable game for him that brought everything down. But and that one he didn't play. He it didn't play that second half, and it's Lloyd has a lot of options now. So and every indication is, I mean, it appeared that that Love took it pretty well, was cheering the guys on, sitting there, and I think KJ Lewis really credited him for that, and everything I've heard, he's still, guys think of him as a good teammate, and all that. He's just been up and down, and you're right. He's been inconsistent. He's shown some, he's had some pretty good games since UCLA game, but Saturdays wasn't one of them. The interesting thing is, the road differences are interesting. It's a small sample size this year, but I will say he does owe the Oregon the Oregon building scoring record. So he proved it there at least, and that is a kind of tough place to play. So I think it's just as much as anything, just if he gets in a groove and he gets that confidence, he can be a different guy. And sometimes he doesn't get it. And I think this year defenses are throwing even more at him. And then if they do something, he gets off, and then it affects him, a lot of the rest of that game. So he's, it's just been a journey with him for sure. But
yeah, we had a discussion with Tommy Lloyd after the TCU game, which was Caleb Love's probably the best game he's ever played in college. And
right.
it was a historically good, I think 30.7 rebounds, 7 assists, 0 turnovers. About, does it matter with players if they hit their first shot or if they get hot early, does it affect them the rest of the game? And Tommy said, there's some evidence that there is, but there's also some evidence that there isn't. And maybe that's not really a thing. But I think with Caleb Love that it is a thing, that he gains a lot of confidence when he hits early. And when he doesn't, he kind of goes into a shell a little bit. So what you want to see from him, I think, moving forward is more consistency, instead of like, you're either great or you're terrible. And there doesn't seem like there's a lot in between there. I mean, there's also, you can influence the game in other ways too. You can play good defense and you can set up your teammates. Not all about making shots. I think he's capable of doing a lot of those things, but I think he gets into a bit of a funk sometimes when it doesn't go well for him early.
Yeah, that's the key there. Yeah, he had 7 assists at TCU, and I think he only had 1 at West Virginia. So yeah, he can do those other things, and but yeah, that confidence seems to affect a lot of part of his games. But I will say it's not unusual. I've covered lots of great shooters over the years, and they all get in funks here, there, and streaks, and it's a lot of it is mental, because these guys are obviously skilled, but it's just they get in a good groove or a bad groove and can go either way. And there is a little bit of evidence. I did try and sketch out kind of Love's first shot thing, with the help of Nate over at Arizona. Does he do better in those? And there was a little bit of evidence that he did, but it just seems like anecdotally, he just looking at him and talking to him after games when things go right, it does make a difference. And at least it maybe not necessarily the first shot, but certainly the first 6 minutes or so, first 8 minutes, how is he doing? I think that does settle in.
So you mentioned the lineup, and this is a big topic of discussion among U of A fans because Henry Vesar has been spectacular in Big 12 play, coming off the bench. He has really emerged since Mo Krivas injured his foot. Carter Bryant, tons of potential, extremely efficient in Big 12 play so far. He's barely missed any shots when he's been out there. KJ Lewis, as you mentioned, has been coming off the bench and is unquestionably one of their best players. So here's the question. Do you change the lineup because those bench guys are doing so well, or do you just kind of stick with what's working? And you've got kind of an idea, like this rotation has been working. Let's not change it. We're winning games, etc. I could definitely make a case for the former because they struggled early in that game. They scored, I think, I'll look this up. They had 2 points in the first 3 minutes and 14 seconds of that game when Trey Townsend and Toby Awaka were on the floor. You could make the case that those two guys, their games are a little too similar offensively for them to play together. There's neither one of them is going to stretch the floor. You get that with Carter Bryant or Henry Vesar.
Yeah, I think they expected they get a little more with that with Trey Townsend, and it hasn't really played out like that. The way he was thought to be a guy who could maybe stretch it a little bit, at least as much as Keyshawn Johnson. Maybe the thought coming in, I think, was he was supposed to be a better 3-point shooter than Keyshawn was. But that's a good point. A lot of people have made it that they are different, and you certainly could see maybe Vesar. Either starting along with either one of those guys. I don't know how you want to divide it up, but I think the main thing is right now, Arizona's won 5 games in a row. They're 3-0 in the conference. I don't think Tommy Lloyd's going to mess with anything, but that's certainly a question I think that I would like to ask. I'm sure others would maybe tomorrow when we get a chance to talk to him again. I think, what is he thinking? Because it really is kind of hitting a breaking point here where you've got three guys literally that are playing like starters that aren't starting, but it's working. So and the guys who are not starting are okay with that for the most part. Everybody wants to start, but they're they know that it's a matter that they can get starters minutes, they can be in at the end of the game. The only thing, as you pointed out, the only thing is when you don't have those guys in the beginning, you do risk that first 4 minutes that you're going to fall behind, and that could end up costing you the game. And so that's the thing I'm sure Tommy Lloyd's looking at and thinking about. And do you want to risk that? I mean, maybe he goes to something where he puts a guy in right away at 18 instead of 16 minutes or something. But right, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. But I'm guessing he's not going to change it at least until they lose a game.
Yes.
Yeah.
So some guys are, like you said, they're okay with coming off the bench and they thrive in that role. Some guys don't. I think there was one game where Toby Awaka didn't start this year, and he really struggled in that game, if I recall.
Although he has struggled the last couple games as well. So, but yeah, he what was that? Here I'm looking. Duke. Yeah, there's a Duke game. Yeah, he had trouble.
Like
that was a game where
that
was the game where Krivas started right instead of him, and that didn't work out well. Which is strange because Awaka was like a 7th, 8th guy at Tennessee last year. I mean, he was not a starter, like used to being that that guy or whatever where he had to be. So I'm not really sure what's up with that. They may have been more of a matchup thing, just didn't work with him and the way Duke was playing. Hard to say.
I would say if you want to look at a way to kind of create more complementary skill sets, you would try to pair the front court guys a little differently. You pair Henry with Trey, or you pair Carter with Toby. That way you've got kind of maybe more of an inside outside type of threat with that current starting lineup configuration.
Yeah.
Like if Caleb's not hitting, like I don't know what the offensive options are. And as you mentioned, you run the risk of falling behind early in the game and having to play catch up.
Right.
And it's not your quote unquote best five.
Right. And it's not. Although, I mean, years ago there was a situation where Lute Olson had Andre Iguodala and I think Hassan Adams as freshmen, if I remember right, coming off the bench, and they were clearly better than the star. They could have argued to be starters, and they rode that the whole season. Had a pretty good season. So stranger things have happened, but but this is a situation where I do think eventually it's probably going to lead to a move. And the interesting thing about some of those pairings you're saying is Tommy Lloyd said something the other day when I was following him outside of the press conference. He said the one thing Henry hasn't shown is that he can really shoot, and he said that could be. I think he said something along the lines of that could be coming. I mean, if Baystar starts to shoot more, and I think he hit a 3 in Cincinnati or whatever, if he starts to do more of that, it's stretching out, then you're right. Then you could pair him with Tobe Awaka. It makes for a really, really, effective combination there. And then maybe Townsend could play the 5 with Bar. I don't know. You could mix and match any number of ways. It's a really interesting possibility, and I'm sure that the U of A coaches are thinking about that right now.
Henry is 3 for 14 from 3, and I feel like fans probably cringe every time they see him take one because he missed a couple of them in that that run by UCLA where they rallied. But he definitely has the skill set. And Tommy said he's been shooting really well in practice. But even if he doesn't do that, he has been so effective as driving to the basket. He's been setting up his teammates. He's kind of like, he's kind of feisty out there, kind of a defensive pest. He's got 10 stocks, steals plus blocks in the 3 conference games. I've been really impressed with the intensity with which he's played, the effectiveness. Really a pleasant surprise, I think, for this team, and someone who's going to be super important for them the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about that. I don't think that gets talked about enough. Maybe I should more, but like his defense, really is better than, is really making a difference, because he's not only is he 7 feet, but he's actually very quick for a 7-footer. He can move, you know, laterally up and back. I mean, he's mobile. We've seen that he is, but now, I mean, since literally the red blue game of the freshman year, that he's pretty mobile for his size, but just defensively, he can kick in. And when he gets, kind of agitated and motivated there, like he was on the road, that can be effective. And, maybe even more so, Tobey Walker's pretty good around the basket, and, you've got, but I think he's a guy who can play 4 or 5 and defend pretty well and do some things, and that might make things, I think, potentially make things a little bit easier for the guards as well. The way he's able to kind of help out, and maybe even, make it easier for the rest of the team to handle their assignments. It just makes the defense a lot more effective. I mean, and I think, in general, this is a team where, the defense has been probably improved in general. I would say the last, part of this winning streak. We talk a lot about the offense and how it's flowing better, and the assist to made basket ratios is rising and all this stuff, but the defense has been pretty good too.
I think the late great Bill Walton would love the way that Henry Vesar is playing right now. Bill used to get so mad when big guys would try to take charges instead of just using their length and their size to try to block shots. And Henry, he either kind of goes up, puts his hands up, or he tries to block the shot. He is not shy about that at all. He does not. He's European, but I think sometimes European players have a reputation for being finesse, and I don't think he's that way at all. I mean, he's kind of skinny, but he's willing to go in there and bang bodies, mix it up, and you really like to see that. Carter Bryant, the other one coming off the bench, he's 11 for 14 from the field in Big 12 play, 4 for 7 from 3, but he's only playing 17 minutes a game. And I think fans would probably like to see him play more. He popped up in ESPN's latest mock draft as a potential first-round pick. You can see the body, the size, the athleticism. You can project him as an NBA type of player. Tommy's bringing him along relatively slowly, kind of picking his spots. It's increased a little bit here and there. What do you think of what you've seen from him and what he could be the rest of the way here?
I mean, yeah, he continued. I mean, ever since I think I first saw him at a tournament up in Mesa, a Nike event, when he was a junior. And he's just, he's always shown those flashes of like, oh my God, this guy has this huge upside. And then he's had some off games, and it's just been like that. He arguably has the highest ceiling of anybody on this team, but he's young and he's a freshman. He's and not only, and then having to kind of play different roles. I mean, he's been a reserve, he's been a starter, he's been a small forward, and now he's a power forward a lot of the time anyway. Lot's been kind of thrown at him. And I think too, he's just his personality, he's really nice guy, and I think he wants to find it, make his place. And I think he knows, he may have all that potential, but it's kind of a delicate thing. You don't want to be just walking in saying, I'm the guy, get out of my way or whatever. And so he's doing, what he's asked, and all that. So I think, but I think it's coming out of, he started to show it, more and more in these games. And this goes along with the whole lineup thing. It's like, right, not only do you wonder about who's the starting lineup, but how can you get him more minutes? and because he's been really effective. I mean, what do we got here? Like, yeah, he played 24 against TCU, but only 14 and a half over the weekend, the average. So and he should be, you'd think more often he'd be more around the 20 mark, but it a lot of it's just a factor of how the game's flowing, and so that's part of it too. But overall, just a lot of pretty steady improvement, and particularly the last month or so, I think his game's really taken off, and that's not a huge surprise for a freshman to, especially one that's kind of juggling different deals, to kind of kicks in about a month or two into the season, when start to get more comfortable. And then guys like him, typically by the end of the season, they're not, as they say, they're not really freshmen anymore at that point. He may be on that path.
Yeah, I was thinking about DeMar DeRozan, who I covered my first year on the USC basketball beat, and he was a freshman, big time recruit
Yeah, he was like
for
top 10, I think.
USC.
Yeah, right.
And I was looking up like his game log, and he actually did play a lot of minutes, but his role wasn't as big early in the season as it became later in the season. He really became kind of a go-to scorer for USC toward the end of the year. I think he ended up being a 7th pick in the draft or something like that, a one and done player, a little more high profile probably than Carter Bryant, but I think they're both pretty humble, well liked by their teammates. I don't know Carter Bryant well, but I observed him on the bench, and he seemed to be rooting on his boys while they were doing well on the court, even if he wasn't out there. And that's always something that I look for, to try to kind of assess what kind of a teammate someone is, like how much they support the other guys when they're not in the game. And Caleb Love seemed to be pretty active and involved in supporting his teammates as well while he wasn't out there against West Virginia. So those are good signs for the team and for the types of players that those guys are.
Yeah, and they're mature enough to know that, and I think they've been told this, like, guess what? The NBA scouts are also watching what you do when you're on the bench. They watch what you do in warmups. Do you have good body language? Do you cheer on your teammates? Because if you're pouting on the bench because you're not playing, they don't want you. I mean, like, it makes a difference. That's why they go to the games. They don't. If NBA scouts wanted to just watch what you do in the games, they could watch it on TV. But one reason there's so many scouts in person is they want to watch the whole picture of what a player is like. So it does make a difference. And I think naturally those guys are good guys. I think, if you saw, there was a video Arizona released of the way they celebrated in the, dancing in the locker room after West Virginia. The first guy they showed was Love, or the second guy. And he was like as into it as anybody else was. And he had a bad game, but he was happy about the way it worked as a per team. So that's a really good sign for them. I mean, and I think for Love, ultimately it's a good thing to be known as that guy. And then, if he can, work on the, if he gets more effective as the season goes on, then maybe he's got a couple things going for him that way.
The one other player I wanted to talk about before we get a tiny bit into what's coming up for Arizona is Anthony Delorso. I thought he had a sneaky good game against West Virginia. He seems like he's fitting in well. It's kind of rocky for him early in the year. Like that Duke game, I really thought, man, this guy is just not good enough to play on this level. But he's made some adjustments. He showed the ability to drive a little bit. He's confident with his 3-point stroke. He actually got injured during the West Virginia game. Kind of got hip checked into some chairs. And was down for a little while. Came right back in, and he looked good. He is not someone I would take out of the lineup because he does provide that floor stretching element. I know he's maybe not as good of a defensive player as some of the other guys, but they need someone who can at least provide a threat from the outside.
Yeah, that's exactly why he's starting, is the floor stretching. I think, and but just, and it hadn't, the last, the previous few games, it hadn't really been much of a factor early, not a factor at all, really. I think TCU and Cincinnati, but West Virginia really did make a difference early. And then, maybe too, he's, it's interesting. I mean, you never really know when you get a guy from a low major conference, how his stats are going to translate, and he probably even less so than Trey Townsend really didn't play that many high major teams. So it was kind of a question of how good is he? Can he really do this? And, but now that he's had more than a handful of games against high major teams, he's adjusting. And, that's that I think right now you're kind of getting, that's kind of the player that I thought he would be, maybe that occasional guy who can stretch the floor. They don't really have too many pure shooters. And, I didn't think he would start, but, again, it's working. That's the way it is right now. So, they're going to keep going with it, I think, for at least until they lose again.
So we are recording this podcast on Thursday morning, January 9th. On Saturday night, Arizona hosts UCF. It is the first of a 2-game homestand. I think there's a little bit of a danger of a letdown when you're coming off a really successful road trip, and UCF is not a high-profile opponent. I think the students are going to be back on campus at that point. Not totally sure on that, but
Well,
8
classes start
o'clock.
Monday, so some
Yeah,
will.
so they
Yeah.
should be. Yeah. So
Yeah.
8 o'clock Saturday. UCF is actually one of the teams that's above 500 in conference road play overall in the Big 12, but they've only played one game. And that was they actually beat Texas Tech on the road. So, you can't let your guard down at all. I believe if I'm reading this correctly on KenPom, their non-conference strength of schedule was 185th. So when you look at their record, it might be a little bit inflated by the teams that they've played. Their overall ranking on KenPom is 78, whereas Arizona is 14. UCF's net rating is 80. Arizona is also 14 there. So you would think that Arizona has a really good chance to be 4-0 going into a pretty high profile game against Baylor on Tuesday of next week. Any initial thoughts on UCF?
Yeah, well, I watched a little bit of their game last night. Colorado was winning that game, and they had to make a nice little comeback there, and it kind of went down to the wire. And they held off Colorado defensively, so that was impressive in that way. But that was a home game, and they played a home game against Kansas and got pasted by what was it, 51
like 50,
points?
right?
I mean,
yeah.
How do you lose it by 50 at home to anybody? I mean, that's just crazy. So they're a little bit hard to figure. And like you said, they played kind of a weaker schedule. They actually lost to Wisconsin by pretty good amount, kind of like Arizona did. So I don't know really what to make of them, but at home Arizona's got to roll. They should be okay for this, but and they do need it. You're right. I mean, I don't think in this conference they can take anything for granted. They need to rack up as many wins as they can, in these situations, because I think the schedule is backloaded. They're going to get, like you said, they're going to get Baylor coming up, and then they've got some
Iowa State twice, right?
They've got Iowa State twice. They've got Houston coming in, and then in February the schedule gets really, really, really tough. So if they can get to 4-0, 6-1 or whatever down the road. I mean, because there's going to be a tough stretch ahead. I'm pretty certain of it, and it's just a matter of to build a little confidence and momentum right now and get those wins up. And then the bigger picture is too, they need to keep polishing up that resume, because it wasn't an NCAA tournament resume coming out of the non-conference season. So they need to have a good showing in the Big 12 for sure.
It was not. You can build up a little cushion by getting to 4-0 for sure. And I think it would behoove them to finish above 500 overall in Big 12 play for the resume, as you mentioned. Seems like there's always been that one game under Tommy Lloyd, that one home game that they lose out of nowhere, kind of that slip up. And I hope that isn't Saturday night, because it does sort of feel a little bit like a trap game. Coming off the big, emotional long road trip where you were highly successful. You've got Baylor coming in. I know Baylor's not ranked right now, but they're very good and have a reputation as such. Whereas UCF, I mean, not a lot of people are thinking about UCF basketball, so I think it's just a little bit of a dangerous spot, and hopefully, they will be mature enough to handle it the right way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. You sometimes, I mean, these guys are kind of, they're so experienced and playing high level, but there's still human nature that hits in a lot of these things. And I think that, like you said, that's why West Virginia maybe wasn't at its best. Arizona probably would have beat them anyway, the way they were playing, but West Virginia was coming off a huge win at Kansas. Then they played Oklahoma State at home and took care of them, and they get ranked. Javon Small is the player of the week. They're feeling good. Students aren't on campus, so it wasn't a crazy environment. I think they just came out a little flat, and that the same thing. You're right. The same thing could happen to Arizona, but they got to know that they don't have any ground they don't have any room for error, basically. I mean, with the non-conference season they played and the fact that the schedule is going to get tougher going ahead, I think they've got to step on this one. So it'll be interesting, I think, kind of how they do respond. I have a feeling they'll be all right, but Tuesday against Baylor, that'll be really a test too.
Nah, that one's a 9 o'clock tip off, which is
We got
one of
eights and
those
nines, right?
made for TV specials. I got to say, like, I was totally unprepared for a 5 p.m. Tuesday tip off. Like, I was getting ready to go to see Koa Pete play at Tucson High, one of Arizona's
Yeah,
top targets in the recruiting front, and I just totally forgot about the game, honestly, because two things: 5 o'clock tip off and Tuesday night that we are just not used to when Arizona gets into conference play, at least when they were in the Pac-12. Like almost every game was on a Thursday, maybe a Wednesday, but they'd always be later. So I was not prepared for that 8 o'clock. Not that I'm looking forward to a 9 o'clock tip
yeah,
off against Baylor, but it is a little bit more like what we're used to. So this morning, Bruce, it was about, I don't know, 36 degrees or so here in Tucson around 7 a.m. Not too much
yeah.
warmer at 8 a.m. Were you hoping for like a little bit more of like, I think Tommy was talking about t-shirt and shorts weather
Yeah. Well,
when he
it's
came
funny when
back?
he said that, and I was like, no, I don't think it's that warm at home, but yeah, and it's not. But I mean, the crazy thing is in West Virginia, it's like high of 26, low of 22. Here, it's high of 71, low of 38. I mean, it's just the difference is so when it's dry and like this, it's just so different from daytime to nighttime, but it is chilly. So I don't know. Maybe he probably wasn't paying attention, and I think he's trying to have a little fun. And I think they wanted to get out of there, and so he was telling the media because they did have their press conference pretty quickly after the game. They wanted to hustle on their flight, although they were still going to get back at 3 in the morning no matter what they did, really. But that was the thing. He said, "Yeah, we got to get out of here. We like it or whatever. You guys are in a beautiful part of the world, but we love Tucson," is what he said. So that was pretty funny. But I'm
Yeah,
interested though. Well, sorry to interrupt. But I'm
no, go
interested
ahead.
to hear. I read your story on Koa Pete, but
Yeah.
I've seen him a number of times, but I have not seen him. I've seen him with USA Basketball. I've seen him with his travel team, but I have not seen him play for Perry. And I know when he plays for Perry, it's everybody's making his life miserable or whatever, and it sounded like it was that and foul troubles, etc. Or what
Yeah.
was your impression of him?
Yeah, well, I mean, he plays center for them, and he's not a
Yeah,
center. I mean, he's 6'7",
yeah,
6'8", so he'll be like a wing or maybe a power forward on the next level. We had a absolutely spectacular photo from our colleague Kelly
yeah,
Presnell that's on the
yeah,
cover of today's Arizona Daily Star, where there's like four Tucson High players surrounding Koa as I think he was going back up for a shot after getting a rebound, and there's just hands all
yeah,
over him, you know. So that's kind of what it's like. I mean, the spacing is not going to be what he'll experience when he's on the next level, but I was impressed with how unselfish he was, how much of a team player he was. He seemed to have really good court sense, and his coach Sam Duane talked about that. He comes from an athletic family. He's the
mm,
seventh of seven siblings, all of whom have played or are still playing college football or college basketball. The most famous among them is Andrus Pete, who was a first-round
right,
pick of the New Orleans Saints and played for them for 9 years and spent this last season with the Las Vegas Raiders, offensive lineman. So, he's clearly got like in his DNA, like really good instincts for sports. And I thought that was evident during that game. Didn't really force the issue on offense, which he could have. And despite a lot of foul trouble, which I think was a product of him just being the biggest and strongest player on the court, he still had, by my account, 22 points, 14 rebounds, and 4 assists. And
mm,
it wasn't a case where he was like, hey, give me the ball and get out of the way. It
yeah,
wasn't
right,
like that at all. It was all kind of in the
yeah,
flow of the offense. I also liked, I was sitting right courtside, like he was talking a lot on defense, which I thought was a good sign too. So we didn't get to talk to him after the game. He didn't want to do any media. We only were able to talk to the coach. So I have no idea where he's leaning, what he's thinking. He's got 5 finalists: Arizona State, where his brother plays on the football team, Houston, Baylor, and Texas. So,
yeah,
a bunch of blue bloods, bunch of really good options for him, and we'll see what happens. We'll see if Bryce James' addition makes any difference. Whether like those guys are all kind of friends, right? And in some way or another. and whether
Yeah, I
that's,
don't
you know,
know with Koa and Bryce if there's a connection or not, honestly, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know a lot of those the West Coast guys on that level all hang out, and a lot of them know. I do think he's yeah. I think just that this Bryce probably is close with the Southern California guys, and I think a
I
lot of
think
people make connection
friends,
with Furries and
right?
and
Yeah.
uh, um, Arenas, Elijah Arenas as well. But who knows? Yeah. I mean, nowadays with NIL and guys leaving, it does. There was some speculation that Pete was going to decide already, but nowadays I think with NIL and also you're waiting to see who's transferring, who's going to be back, who's going to. I mean, if you're a 5-star like Cole Pete, you might as well wait till the spring and see what the best deal is for you, NIL wise and playing situation wise. I know that he likes U of A. He also likes ASU, and I think those other finalists probably still have a shot too. It does seem like yeah, nobody knows a lot, and the fact that he didn't want to talk was probably another indication, and he doesn't want to distract from his team as well. Probably be the guy. So that's in a way that might even be a credit to him. But because I always thought, and in fact, that the one thing that strikes me about him too is that he's still playing for Gilbert Perry in this day and age. Like a guy like him, those guys a lot of times go to they get recruited away from prep schools and guys have deals for him to go wherever, and he's stuck it out. He wants to play, and I think that Sam Dwayne has a lot to do with it too. That family really has a bond with him, and they trust him. But it's interesting that he's still playing for them, and getting hounded because if he was playing on the grind session or whatever they call some of these prep schools, it'd be a little bit different the way he could play. But he's mature enough to know that he's playing at all kinds of different levels, travel ball, USA, and then at high school, and people know his game. It doesn't matter if he has a tough game like he did here at Tucson High.
It was tough, but it certainly wasn't bad. I've
Yeah,
heard that Bryce James is friends with Braden Burries, who's another
yeah, right. I
top
think that's
10, top 15 recruit that
yeah,
Arizona is pursuing. And I don't know, Tommy has not put together like an all-star US based recruiting class really since he's been here, right? It's always a mix of US players and European players or international players.
yeah,
And we are a long way from knowing whether he'll be able to pull this off. But man, like the idea of it is certainly very exciting. If they were to have kind of a Fab Five type of group come in here, Bryce James is certainly an interesting recruit to be a part of this mix. He is not nearly as highly regarded as these other guys, but obviously there are other things that he brings to the table, right? A certain level of celebrity. Um,
yeah.
his dad
It's
is LeBron James, so
yeah,
there's good aspects of that, and maybe there's sometimes
yeah,
there could be some aspects that could be a pain. I think it'll be a net positive to have him
yeah.
here personally. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a low risk. I think you wrote it. It's like a low risk, high reward potential. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I mean, he's not a guy who's going to play right away, maybe not for a few years or a couple of years. Who knows if he even sticks around? But in the meanwhile, I don't think that Tommy Lev would take him if he's not a good guy. I don't know much about him. I saw him play once at that Section 7, and it was hard to even see him because everyone was crowded on the court because it was LeBron's kid, and it's a big deal. But you get that, and maybe you're right. Maybe there's some connections in recruiting, and maybe LeBron's retired or semi-retired or not semi, but like maybe he comes to a game or something, and that brings notoriety. I mean, you think about it, if nothing else, Bryce James' commitment gave U of A like national headlines on New Year's Day. I mean that's just I mean that does mean something, and the other players see that, and and they want to be there, and if LeBron does watch some of the games, other guys want to have LeBron watching them as well. So there's an appeal there that way too, and and the converse of the other side of it is it's possible. I don't know, but maybe Bryce wanted to be further away from LA, whereas with Bronny, it was, at SC being there was just like a fishbowl situation. And, they had to really protect him there. They didn't let him talk to anybody all year. It was weird. We'll see how it works here. But anyway, so it does seem like as long as he's not a disruptive guy, and as long as LeBron, it seems like Tommy Lloyd must have a decent relationship with LeBron at this point, and if that's the case, then what do you got to lose, really? I think that's what they're looking at.
And just so everyone knows, like you can't ask Tommy about Bryce James because he hasn't signed yet. Right? They still, despite all of the changes that have taken place in college athletics, there is still a rule where coaches cannot talk about the commits who have not signed with them yet. So
it seems kind of old fashioned in a day when you got NIL, you got alleged tampering, you got all this, that, and like transfers, this and that. I mean, but yeah, that's the rules. So we talked to everybody else around him, and it's always been that way. And who knows if that'll ever change? But yeah. So he can't talk about him.
Well, that's all for the future. The present looks pretty darn good for the Arizona Wildcats. They take a perfect Big 12 record into their game Saturday night against UCF. Bruce, of course, will be there at McHale Center. We thank him so much for joining us on the Wildcast podcast. You can catch our podcast feed on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube Music. We thank all of you for listening. Upcoming guests will include PJ Brown. We'll break down what's going on with the women's basketball team, and Justin Spears and I, of course, will be back again soon to talk about the latest developments with Arizona football. Thanks again for listening. We will see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks.